Hello, and welcome back to another video. This is the 9th episode. Naruto was unfamiliar with luck. And when Naruto gets lucky, it doesn't go well. When Naruto is beaten on a stormy night, something strange happens. Lightning struck Naruto, but he survived. Remember to like and subscribe. Let's get this party started, shall we? Neji cursed out loud once again as he strained his Byakugan while standing on top of the Hokage monument. His hair was matted down with water while his hood was long ago abandoned. He had an air of anxiety as his head swung right and left. Neji had found himself in a position he had only been through. He, once again, had lost sight of his ward, Shinobi. He was tasked to be her protector while she was in the walls of the village. Ever since the Kumo incident, the security around the two princesses had increased exponentially. He was considered a prodigy among the entirety of the clan and thus was given the task of protecting her while not training or on missions. Unfortunately, for the second time since he came into this position, she had managed to slip from his sight. While he was paying respect to the third Hokage, the girl had quickly escaped his watch. By the time he had opened his eyes and noticed her absence, she was far out of the range of his Byakugan. Neji squinted his eyes before pumping the maximum amount of chakra into his eyes. The veins along the side of head pulsed blue with the amount of chakra he was pumping into them. His once pale lavender eyes were now slowly fading into a brilliant white. The amount of chakra he was pumping into his eyes could lead to disastrous effects if held for too long, but Neji knew he needed to find the princess before night fell. His eyes continued to scan the area before a small smile spread across his face when he found the girl's signature and also who was with her. He quickly cut off the chakra to his eyes before slowly making his way down the monument staircase. He felt confident that who she was with meant her no harm. Naruto's eyes snapped open to the sound of footsteps landing in the clearing he was sleeping in. His eyes quickly met the ones of the intruder and he immediately recognized the boy. He gave him a short nod before looking over at the girl he had come close to skewering only hours ago. She was laying out on the clearing ground, her eyes closed while she emitted small snores from her opened mouth. "I'm guessing she managed to sneak away from you again?" Naruto asked the intruder. Neji nodded before slowly gliding his way towards the duo. He stood above Hanabi, scanning her figure for any injuries. Once he was satisfied with his observation, the Hyuga prodigy turned his head to his blonde-haired equal. "Yes, she did. Thankfully I managed to find her. I admit that when I sensed that she was close to you I sped up my pace, just in case she got the notion to try and kill you once again," Neji said with a smirk on his face. Naruto stared at the normally stoic prodigy before smoothly holding his middle finger to the pale-eyed boy. Neji chuckled before calmly taking a seat in front of the pair. "I have to admit that our roles were flipped around this time. Your cousin has such a way with words," Naruto said with a large amount of sarcasm laced in his voice. Neji let out a short chuckle before his eyes found the tombstone that laid about 20 yards away from their current position. Naruto's eyes followed his and his smirk quickly fell from his face. Neji turned his head back to Naruto and took notice of the depression that seemed to surround the boy. "Depression is not something that fits you, Naruto-san," Neji said. Naruto's frown seemed to increase in depth as his eyes once again found themselves locked to the chiseled tombstone. "This event is not something that I can easily get over. My existence feels more like a curse than a blessing from Kami at the moment," Naruto said. Neji sighed before looking back towards Hanabi. A thoughtful expression took his face before he addressed Naruto. "I remember having conversations with Hanabi and her stating almost the exact same thing," Neji said. This comment caught Naruto's attention as his eyes were now filled with unadulterated curiosity. "Even though I tried my best to make sure Hanabi didn't feel this way, she still blamed herself for her mother's death. To this day I have not been able to snap her out of this type of thinking." A frown marred Neji's feature as his eyes settled onto Hanabi. Hayashi-sama isn't as cruel to Hanabi how he used to be. Though the man tried his best to hide his prejudice towards the girl from her, he failed miserably at the beginning. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, Hayashi saw Hanabi as his wife-murderer instead of his daughter. "I'm almost positive that he would have murdered her in her infancy if our clan didn't have these eyes," Neji said. His arm slowly reached out and he began to run his fingers through the girl's hair. Naruto could sense a large amount of love flowing through the boy's eyes. Not the romantic type of love shared between spouses or partners in a relationship. This was the type of love shared between siblings. While he has gotten much better with his attitude towards her, that prejudice that was present early in her life affected her deeply. It's a burden, but she has managed to push past it. Earlier in her life she was not as strong. I remember times when I would have to restrain her from straining herself past human limitations during training or hurting herself. I remember holding her as she cried when she was just a toddler as the guilt ate away her heart. But now I am proud to see her strength, emotional and physical. It's a transformation from the fragile girl I once knew, Neji said with a small smile on his face while his eyes stared lovingly towards the girl he considered a little sister. I can see the same look in your eyes that I used to see in Hanabi's. An utter loathing of your own existence. I pray that you'll be able to overcome this hurdle in life. I would be lying if I said I doubted Hanabi would be upset if you lost your life, Neji said before standing up. He picked up Hanabi bridal style before nodding towards Naruto. He then took off into the trees, leaving the blonde-haired boy to himself. Naruto sat in the middle of the clearing, staring down at the ground while contemplating the words said by Neji. He slowly climbed to his feet and walked towards the headstone. He placed his hand on the smooth, cool stone and stared down at the engravings. His grip on the stone started to become tighter and tighter as his gaze intensified. I'm sorry that you didn't get to live out your life. But I promise you will not go in vain. I'll live and strive for the both of us. I promise, and I never break my promises, Naruto said. He then leaned down and kissed the headstone before turning around. The sound of thunder filled the clearing as Naruto disappeared on the spot, leaving a charred piece of land in his wake. Naruto cracked an eye open as a flash of lightning lit up the sky before him. He was currently half naked, only having a pair of comfortable pants to cover his form. His hair was matted down with rain and hung loosely before his forehead. His golden blue eyes glowed in the darkness that covered Konoha at the moment. What are you doing up so late, Gaki? Naruto heard a voice said behind him. The blonde-haired boy sighed before closing his eyes again to ignore the man behind him. He heard the wet plop of the man's saddles against the head of the Hokage monument and wanted to growl out his persistence. I thought you were finished moping, Jiraiya said as he stood right behind Naruto. Naruto sighed before standing up and turning to face the man. He was forced to look up as the toad Sanin still had a sizable hide on him. I'm not moping, you perverted toad. I'm meditating. Since Maj accident, I found that thunderstorms have always helped me concentrate. After my fight with Orochimaru, Kisame, and Itachi, I realized that I am out of my league. My control of lightning chakra is almost perfect, but that wasn't enough to stop those three. I barely even touched Orochimaru while Kisame made a fool out of me, Naruto said before turning back towards the edge monument. Jiraiya looked at the boy before looking up towards the sky. A smirk played across his lips before he looked down at Naruto. Gaki, how about you start harnessing the true power of the storm? The spark of interest in Naruto's eyes was the only answer he needed. Now the technique I'm about to teach you is not one I have much experience in. To be honest, I have almost none in it. I managed to acquire the basic concept of the technique while I was in Kumo. Once you're able to form and create the element, it's up to you to experiment and test with it. I wanted to tell you to be careful, but I have a feeling that you will not, Jiraiya said as the two stood in the middle of a training ground. It was still the dead of night and the storm above them had not let up at all. The name of the technique is Storm Release. It combines the lightning chakra nature and the water chakra nature to produce high-powered energy beams that have the power to cut through steel. The combination of those two elements can also be used to create clouds, which could be used for an assortment of things. A grin almost split the toad Sanin's face when he saw the spark of interest in Naruto's eyes explode to a raging fire. Jiraiya unsealed a small scroll from his personal pocket dimension and threw it towards Naruto. The boy caught it before quickly unfurling it. Storm Release requires you to basically conduct your lightning chakra through beams of high-powered water stream, electrifying the water and giving the lightning chakra more flexibility. I know that lightning chakra can be rather rigid and takes a high amount of concentration and chakra when it comes to actually making it the least bit flexible. With Storm Release, the technique is more potent, more flexible and more powerful, Jiraiya said. Naruto's eyes scanned through the scroll before he slowly closed it. A frown was resting upon his lips as he stared at the smirking man. This scroll says that this technique requires a high level of control when it comes to the usage of water chakra. I have almost no experience in it, Naruto said. Jiraiya grinned before quickly summoning a toad beneath him. The toad tensed his legs before launching itself across the village. Well, you better get working on that. Naruto heard Jiraiya screamed as the toad sailed through the air. His eyes twitched as the steady downpour of rain continued to hit him. He quickly gave up on his anger and trudged over to the lake. He had work to do. Hanabi's eye snapped open as she heard her name be called gently from the other side of her door. She groaned before slowly pushing herself off of her bed. She swung her blanket off the comfortable mattress and jumped out of bed before a shiver ran up her spine as her feet made contact with the cold wooden floor. She ignored the coldness as she stood up and began her day. She quickly had a shower and putted some clothes on. Her attire consisted of a pair of Anbu-style black pants that had a single wrap around the thigh region. A thick mesh shirt covered her body and a beige, open jacket was placed above that. A pair of wristbands were on her wrist while her long black hair parted into two bangs that fell on either side of her face. A single lock of hair laid in the middle of her forehead. Satisfied with the way she looked, she pushed her way out of the room and into the hallway of the main branch complex. All of the side branch members of clan in the hallway immediately stopped what they were doing and bowed towards the girl. She quickly raised their hand to dismiss them before making her way towards the main dining hall that was used by the main family and members of the council. She entered the room and saw her father, sister and grandfather sitting at the table. She got a respectful nod from her father and grandfather. Her sister looked at her before slowly putting her head down. Hanabi could see the conflict in the girl's eyes when she actually looked up at curse seal mark that Naruto had placed on her head. It scarred over and now left a pale version of its former self. When Hiyashi had seen the mark, he all but demanded Naruto's head for scarring his daughter. Luckily he didn't get his wish and was forced to deal with it himself. He searched the village for the best medics and had even came close to putting out a mission to search for Tsunade. The council had managed to talk him out of it. Hanabi took her seat next to her sister and began to slowly dig into the rice that was placed in front of her. The entire table was quiet as the family quietly ate their foods, keeping their thoughts and feelings to themselves. I was informed by several branch members that Neji had to carry you into the compound. I am surprised that you managed to sneak away from him once again. Hiyashi finally spoke. Hanabi cursed inwardly while keeping her face in its naturally stoic form. She looked up from the bowl and met her father's eyes. Even though he wasn't saying it, Hanabi could tell he wanted to know where she had run off to. While I do respect Son Daime-sama, I felt like I had paid my respects and went off into the forest to train, Hanabi said without missing a beat. Hiyashi slowly nodded his head before idly picking at the remaining rice on his meal. Hinata and her grandfather were completely quiet, only observing the situation instead of getting involved. A rather smart move on their part. Neji reported to me that he had found you alongside Naruto Uzumaki. Hanabi cursed once again in her mind and reminded herself to pay attention to her loose-lipped cousin. Luckily she had planned for this just in case. As part of paying my respects to Son Daime-sama, I decided to make amends with Uzumaki-san. I planned to do it later but it turned out he had also skipped out on the memorial. Hanabi had to pat herself on the back for that one. Her father seemed to accept the excuse as he once again went back to eating his rice. Her grandfather shot her a look before smirking and going back to eating. Hanabi suddenly stood up from the table and grabbed her bowl. She asked her father to be excused from the table and quickly left the dining hall when given permission to do so. She informed him that she would be training in one of the training grounds for the rest of the day. Hanabi roared as she sent her arms shooting towards one of the many trees of Konoha. Her arms were a blur as she sent strike after strike towards the tree. The bark was quickly ripped off the tree. A thin layer of sweat covered her body as her arms slowly started to lose speed from exhaustion. She finally let out one last growl before sending a palm strike to the tree, cutting through several inches of tree. Hanabi let out a sigh as she fell flat on her ass. She had exhausted herself with that last volley of palm strikes. She reached for the water bottle behind her and quickly took several long gulps from it. She lifted the bottle from her lips and set it back on the ground, already looking refreshed from her drink. "Hello there, firecracker." Hanabi quickly jumped to her feet and twisted around to face the new threat. She quickly dropped from her defensive stance when her eyes locked onto the golden spiky mane that she was quickly becoming familiar with. "Hello there, crybaby," Hanabi said with a smirk on her face. She was surprised when instead of getting upset, the blonde-haired boy seemed to smile. He sat down in front of her before quickly swiping her water bottle. She let out a short yelp of protest but in the end decided to give it up. "I guess I deserved that one," Naruto said with a short chuckle that caught Hanabi by surprise. The girl stared at Naruto wearily as he looked down at the ground, seemingly contemplating something. "I know this may sound weird but I wanted to thank you for smacking some sense into me. I honestly needed it. My mind was in the wrong place and sometimes it takes a little violence for it to get back," Naruto said while looking at the shocked girl. The girl quickly wiped the shock off her face to answer him. "There's no need to apologize. I could see the look in your eyes and knew that was a road you did not need to go down. I've been down that road and I still wish someone had taken the time to do that to me," Hanabi said, shocking herself with the amount she had spoken. Naruto slowly nodded his hand while dragging his finger through the dirt. "I heard from Neji." Hanabi once again cursed her cousin within her head. She would really need to address how loose-lipped he had been recently. "He told me about your past, what you went through. While I do not just hand out respect willingly, I can respect the struggles and pain you have gone through. Your pompous attitude belies your strength." Naruto finished with a small smirk playing across his lips. Hanabi huffed at the slight insult but paid more attention to the respect aspect of what Naruto said. The last thing she thought she had was the respect of the shinobi she almost killed. "You should respect me. I am of the heiress of the Hyuahhh." Hanabi was silenced when a short bolt of lightning struck her foot. She felt a short amount of pain before her foot went completely numb. She stared at the blonde-haired boy and saw him shaking his head. "I do not respect you because of your position or what you inherit. I respect you for surviving, for fighting through something that almost destroyed me. You being a heiress has nothing to do with it," Naruto said. Hanabi stared hard at the boy for several seconds before breaking her stare. She looked down at the ground, seemingly contemplating the words that were just said to her. No one had ever said something like that. It was a new and rather shocking experience for her. She was snapped out of her musing when she saw Naruto stand up in front of her. She let out a yelp when she was lifted to her feet by him. She glared up at him and was surprised to see him settling into a stance. "I wanna see how much you have improved," Naruto said with a grin on his face. A confident smirk quickly made its way onto Hanabi's face as she backpedaled several yards away from Naruto. She then settled into the starting stance of the Juken, prepared to face her senior. "Come on little firecracker, try to make it interesting this time," Naruto said. Hanabi's smirk only grew as she dashed forward towards Naruto, her fingertips blazing with chakra. She was immediately forced to veer right as the ground under her erupted with great force. She watched in awe as what looked to be a giant beam of energy ripped through the earth. She looked up and saw Naruto with his hands placed on the ground, looking up and smirking at her. "Storm release, Earth's great wrath," Naruto said with a smirk playing across his lips. Hanabi looked in shock at the technique but quickly climbed to her feet. She once again charged at Naruto, albeit slightly more cautious this time around. She zigzagged towards her stationary opponent before landing in a crouch right in front of him. "Kaiden," Hanabi yelled as she quickly began to spin in place. She allowed a smirk to come onto her usually stoic face when she heard a grinding noise emit from outside the Kaiden. She continued to spin for several more seconds, not trusting the tricky blonde to have completely fell for her trick. After the few seconds were up, she slowly dropped her technique. She was shocked to see a grinded-up log laying before her. "Too slow." Hanabi heard from behind her before she was quickly forced to duck. She planted her hands on the ground before using them to hold herself up while she swung her legs around, attempting to take her opponent's legs out. She watched him jump into and attempted to send a mule kick towards his chest. Unfortunately her legs did not reach him. She paid for her oversight when Naruto zapped her left leg, making it temporarily numb. Hanabi growled before pushing herself up in a full handstand before slowly leaning back until she landed back on her good leg. She wasn't given any rest as Naruto unleashed a fierce assault on her. With her paralyzed leg, she was nothing but target practice to the boy. She felt like she was receiving Juken strikes every time Naruto would land a hit on her, that part of her body would be left either paralyzed or numb. Within a minute, she was left completely useless and back on her ass. "You really need to work on your agility. After the first hit you should have been more cautious of my hits. Though after that first hit on your leg, you were pretty screwed," Naruto said while staring down at the girl. He smirked as she growled while trying to move her numb body. "Though you did do better this time. I tried a lot harder this time and you still lasted more than a minute. Keep this up and you'll catch up to Neji." Hanabi heard a scoff from behind her and turned to see her cousin standing there. Hanabi is still far too wild while battling. If she took the time to analyze you first and actually activate the Byakugan, you would have seen the massive amount of lightning chakra present literally at his fingertips, Neji said while slowly approaching the duo. Hanabi had the decency to blush in embarrassment at overlooking such an important thing. "Though your Juken strikes have increased in power and speed. I hypothesize that if you managed to strike Naruto in the heart, you would have actually killed him this time around," Neji said with a smirk on his face. He was forced to dodge a miniature lightning bullet that came shooting towards his feet. He let a light chuckle emit from his lips as he saw a rather pissed off Naruto. Even Hanabi had to release a giggle at her cousin's rather morbid joke. "Calm your temper, Naruto-san. I only jest," Neji said as he was forced to dodge a barrage of lightning strikes that intended to skewer him. He was forced to hide behind a tree when Naruto started to use both of his fingers to release a storm of lightning strikes upon him. He felt the air around him electrify as the bullets came closer and closer to completely piercing the tree. "Would you calm down if I said that the council is requesting your presence alongside mines?" Neji yelled over Naruto's lightning bullets. He smirked when he heard the assault quiet down considerably. He peeked his head out from behind the tree and was forced to quickly retract it when Naruto sent one last lightning bullet towards his head. He heard his cousin and the blonde-haired boy he was being forced to retrieve let out a chuckle. I'm surprised they're actually calling me inside. Last time I was in the chamber I attempted to kill them all, Naruto said with a small chuckle. He was met with silence by his two companions. I won't even ask. I just came to let you know they summoned you. I will be waiting along with Shikamaru in front of the council chamber. Please make haste, Neji said before disappearing in a sunshine. Naruto sighed before turning towards the still paralyzed girl. I guess we have to cut this session a little short, Naruto said before reaching down towards Hanabi. She let out a short yelp when he felt his hand slip underneath her shirt. She quickly began to struggle as Naruto's cold hand landed on her stomach. Her struggle quickly stopped when she felt feeling quickly returned to her. Calm down. I was just absorbing the excessive amount of lightning chakra inside of you so that moving could be possible. Don't flatter yourself, Naruto said with a laugh as Hanabi scrambled to her feet with a blush dusting her cheeks. Naruto laughed even more at the girl's blush before disappearing in a flash of lightning, leaving an embarrassed and irate Hanabi. Naruto reappeared in front of the council chamber in a small crack of lightning that burst through the ceiling. He heard Shikamaru sigh and Neji chuckle as the secretary jumped from her desk. Why do you have to be so troublesome? Shikamaru said to Naruto as the secretary tried, and failed, to retain her air of professionalism after her recent jump scare. Naruto waved Shikamaru off before turning to the council room door. Shall we? Naruto asked. He was greeted by a nod from Neji and a sigh from Shikamaru. He reached forward and pushed open the door. The first thing he noticed was the increased amount of Anbu presence inside of his room. He had to hold in a chuckle at this. He should have known they would do something like that. Even Jiraiya was present in the room, most likely in the case that he would lose control over the seal. Naruto, Shikamaru, and Neji. It's very nice to see you three. Tsunade's voice rang out from the back of the room. She took the head of the room while the three advisors sat under her. The room was lined with the representing members of the council, civilians on the right and ninjas on the left. I know we all do not really want to be here at the moment, so let's make this quick, Tsunade said before reaching down beneath the desk. She pulled out 3 Chunin vests before throwing them towards the now promoted ninja. After careful consideration we have determined that you three best exemplify the qualities that should be expressed by Chunin. I congratulate you three on your promotion. You will be expected to lead teams of lower-ranked ninja. You will be granted access to higher-ranked techniques and training. You will be given a week off before starting some higher-ranked missions. I expect good things out of you three, Tsunade said with a small smile on her face. Shikaku lifted his thumbs up towards his son while his head was firmly planted against the desk he was sitting at. Hiyashi nodded towards Neji while the boy nodded back. Council dismissed, Tsunade said before the members of the council quickly dispersed. Naruto turned to exit the door but was halted when he felt a hand attempt to grab his shoulder. That person was now banging their hand against the ground, attempting to gain feeling back into his hand. Gaki. How's the progress? Jiraiya wanted to curse once again when he found that the young man had disappeared. He had a tendency to do that. Night had quickly fallen upon Konoha after the events of the council. Almost the entire village was asleep. Only the Hokage and a handful of the ninja corps were still awake. One of these ninja was our blonde-haired protagonist. He was standing in the middle of a clearing, the same one that contained the gravestone of Amai. He was seemingly unarmed, but one knew that only with a small exertion of chakra that he would have a sea of kunai at his fingertips. 2 weeks, huh? Plenty of time to get started, Naruto said with a large grin. He bit his thumb before slamming his palm against the ground. A large seal array appeared under his feet and began to glow a blinding white light. After a few seconds, a large puff of smoke erupted from underneath Naruto and quickly spread through the clearing. When the smoke cleared, all that was revealed was a slightly scorched piece of land. When Naruto opened his eyes, he was greeted to a sight that made his blood flow excitedly inside of him. An army of panthers stood before him. Ranging in size from miniature to giant. Each one was colorized differently and was covered in the sleek and form-fitting armor of the Panther clan. Naruto-sama. A roar of voices said. Naruto grinned before throwing his hood overhead. He let his chakra explode around him, filling the air with an electrical buzz. Let's go claim your homeland, my brothers, Naruto yelled out. He was met with a roar of approval from his summon, no family. He was a member of the Panther clan now. And it was his duty to take back what was rightfully theirs. Loud cheers erupted through the villages as firecrackers exploded in the sky. The navy blue and red flash powder lit up the firmament. The children stared in awe as the powder quickly left from their view while the adults cheered on in a joyous and drunken stupor. The smile seemed to be infectious as every inhabitant of the village had one on their faces. Everything seemed normal within this village, it was littered with children, and the adults seemed to know and appreciate each other's company. Except that these villagers weren't humans. No, they were far from it. These villagers were the inhabitants of the Gama territory. They were the ancient and powerful toads of the summoning realms. The word apostrophe, Gama, means toad in English. Here it's used for names of the Gama clan. Example, Gamatatsu, Gamakichi, Gamaken, and Gamabunta was the proud leader of this particular village, which so happened to be one of the many that littered the Gama territory. The old, wizened toad smiled as his people celebrated the birth of the great prophecy toad. The toad had been alive since the birth of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, sage of the Six Paths for all who don't know. He was well respected by each and every single member of the Toad clan. His age and prophecies was the stuff of legends even in the lands of the other summoning beasts. Gamatatsu sighed before blowing out a small cloud of smoke from his wooden pipe. Due to his size, the pipe was almost as large as a full-grown tree and the puff of smoke was the size of a cloud. Though for toads his size, this was nothing but an abnormal occurrence. Gamatatsu had come into his position of power after his involvement during the Summoning Wars. The Summoning Wars were a war held between hundreds of the different summoning clans that littered their homelands. A baby boom had occurred among several of higher-ranked summoning clans. Peace had settled over the entirety of the summoning lands, allowing the inhabitants to mate and give birth at an accelerated rate. And with so many newborns came the need for territory. Thus the first Summoning Wars started. It all began with the Hebi, Plain Snake and English clan taking on the Ryu Dragon clan with several of their allies. The dragons had the advantage of maneuverability with their ability to fly, but the snakes held the power over deception. They managed to disguise several members of their clan as dragons under a powerful illusion and cause havoc from the inside. By time the snakes attacked, the dragons had done so much infighting that it was almost a bloodless takeover. That didn't include the mass execution the snakes held to ensure that no rebellious dragons would rise up and attempt to win their territory back. The snakes had renamed the cave-littered mountain, but every single other summoning clan still referred to it as the Ryuchi Cave, Dragon's Cave. The snake's takeover of the dragon was the beginning step of a domino effect in the summoning world. The Hawk and Crow clan battled for dominance on some of the highest peaks of the summoning world. The Salamanders completely slaughtered the Lizard clan, burning down every single one of their monuments. The usually docile elephants ordered a bounty for every head of the prominent Giraffe clan leaders. Pandemonium spread throughout the lands. The Toads had tried their very best to stay out of the chaos, but they too were eventually forced to expand. Mount Myaboku, the mountain where the Toads come from. It's all like yellow and has frog statues there, could only hold so many of the quickly expanding Toad clan. They had tried peaceful negotiation at first, but that failed miserably. Once riots started to break out in some of the more overpopulated areas of the homeland of the Toads, their decision was made for them. To avoid civil war, they had to fight. With their Sage mode, Senyin Modo Senin Modo is practically a mode that enchants your senses and strength while making you overpowered, and large size. They were a fierce enemy to every single enemy they faced. The Bork clan that took refuge on some of the lower parts of the mountain had quickly fallen by the assault of the ferocious Toad. Gamatatsu had remembered that battle as it was his first time taking a life. He also clearly remembered the night after because of the copious amount of vomit he had let out. Several branches of the deer and bear had fallen under the might of the mighty Toad clan. They quickly marched their way down the mountain, eliminating every animal clan that stood in their way. Peaceful negotiations were lost as the warriors fought for peace within their own land. Then the Toads encountered the Panther, Japanese Hyo, clan. That had by far been the bloodiest battle of the Toads' conquest. They had lost many members during the fight. The Panthers had the home field advantage, knowing the land. They also held the advantage over stealth and speed. But once again, the Toad's Sage mode managed to overcome the Panthers' advantage. The sensing ability granted by Sage mode rendered the Panthers' stealth null and void. Eventually the Toads were able to overpower the speedy big cats. Gamatatsu could still remember the seething looks the surviving Panthers sent his way as they lined up for execution. The battle had been so vicious that the elders wanted to make sure that the Panthers would never hold a legacy once again. They thought they had managed to succeed in this. If only they realized how wrong they had been. Lightning release, Fangs of Lightning. Kaminari no Chibai Kazuchi no Kiba, a voice said from within the room. Gamatatsu did not know what hit him. His mind didn't have the time to comprehend what happened to him. He saw a bright light enter the peripheral of his vision before an intense burning sensation overwhelmed him. Naruto slowly landed on his feet as the now two separate half of the Toad chieftain fell to the ground. Blood quickly started to soak the wooden floor as it flowed freely from the rather large wound. Naruto stared at the blood, feeling no remorse in what he'd just done. This Toad had been the cause of hundreds of deaths within his clan, including women and children. Payback was always a bitch. Loud cheers erupted through the village as the toads merrily danced the night away. Midnight had long since passed, but the toads' celebration did not stop. Their once calm and collected celebration had turned to a drunken party that did not have any signs of stopping anytime soon. This fact seemed to be proven when suddenly a bright light started to emit from the windows of Gamatotsu's home. The light was bright enough to capture every coherent toad as they watched in wonder. The ones completely lost in a drunken haze merely thought it was another fireworks displayed and cheered on as the light faded. Their cheers quickly died off when the windows of the house exploded into millions of glass shards. Following the glass shards was a steady stream of blood. The villagers watched in shock as the glass fell to the blood-stained ground. A scream ripped out of the window, throwing the toads out of their drunken and confused haze. A multitude of smoke clouds quickly erupted around the form of the toads as they unsealed their weapons. Any children left awake were escorted back to the safety of their homes. The warriors of the village quickly gathered in a group and started to approach the massive wooden doors to the house. Their weapons were held at ready, just in case of an ambush. If only they knew that was the least of their problem. The militia group froze into a defensive stance when the wooden doors to the mansion slowly creaked open. Anxiety gathered in their eyes as they waited whatever monster that lay behind the doors. Their anxiety was settled when a single golden chain peeked out from behind the door. The chain seemed to examine each of the massive toads in front of itself before quickly zipping back inside the house, shutting the door behind itself. The toads blinked in confusion at the sudden arrival of the human-sized chain. "What the hell?" one of the toads asked. His answer was silence as the rest of them had no idea how to respond to the event that just took place in front of them. "It's coming back out," one of the smaller toads yelled out. They once again settled into a defensive stance, albeit slightly more relaxed than earlier. This time around the door opened all the way, allowing the toads to see what lay inside. What greeted their eyes would horrify them to years. Blood splattered every single inch of the living room. The ceiling, the walls, the floor, every piece of furniture was covered in the crimson liquid. That wasn't the only disturbing thing though. What was even more disturbing were the massive ornaments hanging from the walls. Tied to the bloodied walls were the members of the Gamatotsu family. They too were covered in blood, the only sign they actually were alive were the shifting looks of horror on their face. Golden chains that seemed to release a pulse of electricity every couple of seconds kept the amphibians in place. And sitting in the middle of all of this was a small, blonde-haired boy dressed in all white. His pristine clothes seemed so out of place with the bloodied room. His chair was the decapitated body of Gamatotsu while the two separate halves of the toad's head laid at his feet. A small camp roared right in front of him. "You guys gathered rather quickly. I thought most of you were drunk off your asses by now," the small boy yelled out. The toads stared in shock as Naruto slid down the decapitated body of their leader. The boy's feet hit the bloodied ground and at the same moment several golden chains erupted from underneath him. The toads all seemed to collectively flinch before one of them stepped forward. "My name is Gamanaki and I declare you under arrest for the murder of Chief Gamatotsu and the abduction of his family. Release them immediately and come with us or face the wrath of the Gama clan," the gigantic toad said while lowering his sword towards Naruto. The boy scoffed before flicking wrist towards one of the bound family members. The chains holding the bound female toad erupted in a bright blue light. Screams filled their eyes while ozone filled their noses as the toad was electrified. Naruto kept up the steady stream of electricity for several seconds before flicking his wrist once again. The electricity immediately died out and left a pending and partially burnt toad. "You're not in a position to demand anything from me. I command you to lower your weapons or face the wrath of the Panther clan," Naruto said with a smirk. Gamanaki's eyes widened before narrowing considerably at Naruto. "You hide behind a name that holds no power. This just proves how lowly you are. I do not know how you've managed to find your way into the summoning realm. Ningen means human in English, but with your crimes, I doubt anyone will miss you," Gamanaki said before widening his stance. The group behind him seemed to pick up on his intentions and to widen their stances. Naruto sighed at this before clicking his tongue at the toads. "If you do not surrender or even attempt to attack me, I cannot guarantee the safety of the children you left at home." If possible, the atmosphere grew even tenser at Naruto's statement. Whispers started to erupt throughout the crowd as they debated whether or not the boy was bluffing. "There's only one of you, boy. I can only sense one source of human chakra and that is you. Your threat is empty," Gamanaki said. Naruto opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted by a soft purr. "I'll take it from here," a feminine voice said from behind the body of Gamatotsu. Naruto nodded before taking a seat while looking up towards the giant toads. The toads watched in shock as a feline creature slowly skulked its way out from behind the giant toad's body. The feline was about 50 feet long and 30 feet tall. Its paw left white imprints in the blood-covered room as it stalked towards the toads. Impossible, Gamanaki said while stepping back. While he had only been a child during the initial summoning wars, even he remembered all of the soldiers returning to battle with injuries after confrontations with his feline clan. They had been one of their worst enemies to face, and now they supposedly came back from the dead to haunt them. I assure you, amphibian, that it is very possible. I also assure you that my summoner's claim holds all the weight in the world to you. Throw down your weapons or I cannot guarantee the future of your children. The panther all but purred out. The toads stared in shock as a twisted form of a grin formed upon the feline's maw. We have to kill it before it can signal any of its comrades. One of the toads tried to whisper into Gamanaki's ear. With the panther's enhanced hearing, it managed to pick up on the toad's rather loud whispering. It clicked its tongue before shaking his head. That would not be a good idea for your health and safety, the panther said. The toads continued to look at it before Gamanaki took a step forward. And why would it not be? We outnumber you and overpower you. Even a panther or a dragon can't defeat a group of 50 toad warriors. The massive toad said as the group behind him agreed with a loud yell. The panther growled before shooting a look towards Naruto. The boy nodded before slamming one of his hands onto the ground. The toads were shocked when a wave of golden chains suddenly popped up from out of the ground and in the door frame. The doors were sent blasting outwards as the chains took their place. Naruto then closed his eyes before sending a minuscule amount of chakra pulsing outwards. The toads became horrified when the blood-covered surface began to glow a bright blue in several intricate designs. I have covered this whole entire house with another explosive tags to blow up the entire hill on which this house sits upon. I'm just a clone while Mayo-chan here can get out of range if necessary. You on the other hand will not be able to escape. So it'll be in the best interest to surrender. Gamanaki's eyes searched around the room, noticing each and every single explosive tag. His head then turned back to observe the golden chains that blocked them from their freedom. The toads were pulsing with chakra and every couple of seconds a small current of electricity would run through them. They truly were trapped. What's to stop you from killing us when you killed Gamatotsu so violently? Gamanaki yelled out. He was immediately met with protest at the idea of giving up, but a level glare shut them up. I only killed Gamatotsu for his crimes against my kind during the summoning war. He participated in the genocide of thousands of panther men, women and children. Consider this just as retribution, Naruto yelled out while keeping contact with the ground. Gamanaki's eyes narrowed when they landed on the blonde-haired child who was stopping them from exiting. Throw down your weapons or forfeit the life of every single toad in the village. The revealed Mayonaka said with a sense of finality in her voice. The toads continued to in between the duo and the glowing explosive tags that were just a single chakra pulse away from exploding. In Gamanaki's head the choice was obvious. Most of their fighting force was trapped inside of a bomb while the enemy had an unknown amount of allies, unknown abilities and a wild card of a summoner. The lives of their children and citizens were on the line. Naruto smirked when he felt the ground shake as the toads dropped their weapons. Everything was going to plan. It's been almost 10 minutes since that golden barrier appeared up. I'm telling you, we need to go up there and see what's going on. A loud voice boomed out. Murmurs followed the voice's loud proclamation. And just leave our children undefended? We don't even know what happened. We don't know how many things there are. We can't just abandon everything and go investigating. Well, what the hell are we supposed to do? We can't just sit here and wait. Look. The barrier has fallen. The crowd of toads all turned towards Gamatotsu's house and watched in anticipation for their comrades to exit the house. Several moments of silence greeted them before the first toad exited the house. Gasps erupted through the village at the golden chains wrapped around the upper half of each toad that walked out the house. Their weapons were nowhere in sight as they walked in a line out of the house. Their heads were held down as an air of defeat seemed to wash over the whole entire village. The gasps grew even louder when 3 blood-covered toads walked out of the house. They were instantly identified as Gamatotsu's family member, but the toad himself was not part of the group. Several members of the village ran towards the group of chained toads only to stop with a horrified expression on their faces when they saw what lay behind the long line of chained toad. Naruto had his hands held out with golden chains sprouting from every inch of skin on his hands. He was riding on top of a massive Mayonaka that would release a growl every couple of seconds to keep the line moving. What the hell, Gamanaki? Why are you in chains? One of the toads asked. The toad's eyesight remained locked on the ground as he slowly made his way towards the village. A small, or rather large depending on the way you look at it, group of toads had gathered at the village entrance as the line inched closer and closer to the entrance. Once the chained toads got within the village, Naruto stood up on top of Mayonaka's back and started to project his voice throughout the village. People of the Sani, Uk, No, this is not a Japanese word, or so I think. That is the name of the village with no double meaning, village. You are now under the control of the Panther clan. Any resistance will be met with violent force. Throw down any weapons and surrender yourself to my comrades. Naruto finished off. The toads were confused at the last stop, but their confusion quickly turned into shock as dozens of panthers slowly made their way out behind their homes, from within and even from the roofs. The massive different color panthers surrounded the group of toads as they stared in shock at their long-forgotten enemy. Gamanaki. What is all of this? One of the toads yelled while staring down at one of the panthers. The toad didn't even bother to answer, too defeated to answer his comrade's question. Fortunately for him, Naruto had plenty of answers for him. This, my friend, is a takeover. Whether you want it to be hostile or not is up to you. Jiraiya felt a shiver run up his spine as he sat crouched on one of the many roofs that populated Konoha. For some reason, he felt that something had just occurred that was going to be causing him a lot of headaches in the future. If only he could figure out what that thing was. It's probably that brat. Knowing him, he probably takes pleasure from seeing me in pain. Jiraiya grunted to himself before quickly hopping off the roof and landing in the middle of the street. People jumped back in fright as the long-maned ninja suddenly appeared in the crowd, but after catching a glimpse at his trademark face markings, quickly relaxed. Some even greeted him, calling out his name in joy. Sometimes it really pays to be famous, Jiraiya said as a group of women ran up and greeted them. Fortunately for them, Jiraiya actually had something to do and couldn't indulge himself in their misplaced hero worship. Sorry ladies. The gallant toad sage Jiraiya is on a mission. He must make haste lest the village falls into disrepair, Jiraiya said, earning a dramatic swoon from the crowd of women that had surrounded him. He formed a hand sign before disappearing in a flurry of leaves. He's so handsome. Did you see those muscles? He's so strong. Hey, didn't he say his name was Jiraiya? Isn't that the same name of the person who writes those perverted books? Yeah, it is. I heard he gets his inspiration from peeping on women. Really? Let's get him. Maybe being famous didn't pay off exactly how Jiraiya thought. Hanabi could honestly say for the first time in her life that she was sincerely confused on an issue. Throughout her life, her path had been set before her and she followed it diligently. Every decision she made by herself, while was calculated, was normally resolved within a few moments of the obstacle making itself known to her. But for the past couple of hours, her mind has been a battlefield of conflict as she stared at the objects that were causing her so much trouble. Ramen or unagi? Japanese food to be short, Google it if you want, Hanabi said to herself as she stared down at menu in front of her. Dozens of items were displayed, but Hanabi had already made her way past those choices. She had initially decided on unagi, but her mind had slowly drifted to the blonde-haired shinobi that had been plaguing her mind as of recently. The boy's obsession with the salty snack had quietly snuck up on her mind and now she was undecided. If I get both it could mess up my diet, though I haven't treated myself in a while. I guess this wouldn't hurt too much, Hanabi said before quickly ordering both of the items. The waiter seemed pleasantly surprised at her selection but said nothing as he returned to the kitchen to relay the order. Hanabi began to tap her fingers against the wooden table as her mind wandered off. It had been 3 days since she last saw Naruto and the girl could honestly say she missed his company. While she would not admit that she missed the boy himself, she would admit that his company was enjoyable to be around. His carefree attitude towards her despite her status as an heiress was a breath of fresh air. The fact that he was also able to almost completely negate her juken at a whim also may have been a motivating factor. Sparing with him forced her to rethink her strategies inside of launching herself headforce. Her usual strategy consisted of dodging and evading the opponent's strikes until she was able to get within short range, then render their chakra useless. With Naruto, she was hard-pressed to dodge his mid-range and long-range attacks, and when she got within short range, he could simply blast her away or paralyze her. She admits that after their first official spar, she had felt severely outclassed by the boy, but she quickly got over the feeling and instead strived to defeat him in one spar. Best to say that she came nowhere close yet. Hanabi was snapped out of her musings when the waiter came back with 2 plates. The man gave her a polite smile before bowing, disappearing back into the kitchen. The girl gave a quick word of thanks before digging into her food. He did what? Just as she put in the first bite of unagi in her mouth, she was stopped as a loud yell roared through the village. The ground itself seemed to shake with the anger the voice was emitting. For some reason I think it has something to do with him, Hanabi said before shaking her head and digging back into her food. She had picked a rather interesting sparring partner. He did what? Jiraiya yelled as he stared down at the ground. A small sigh came from below him before a black cane slammed itself down onto Jiraiya's head. The man was sent crashing to the ground. You heard me, boy. I'm older than you and my hearing hasn't started failing me yet. The boy you are supposed to look after is wreaking havoc in the summoning realm. He along with his panther summons have already recaptured 3 old panther settlements. How could you let this happen, Jiraiya? The small figure said. Jiraiya looked up at the figure to examine the angry look on its face. The figure was a green toad with white hair styled in somewhat of a mohawk, very thick eyebrows and a small head on a small high-colored cape. I can't look after him. Jiraiya was silenced when the toad slammed his cane back down onto Jiraiya's head. You don't understand, boy. We needed this territory for ourselves. Do you know how close we were to civil war back then? We can't handle all these toads migrating back to the mountains. You were supposed to look over him. The toad yelled before slamming his cane repeatedly over the sage's head. Jiraiya just laid there and took the punishment. Now there's no way I or you can reverse summon him as he is not part of our clan. But I highly doubt he will stay in the summoning realm for long. If he does, well, measures will have to be taken. Hopefully that won't be needed because when he gets back you will handle this. Or I'll make you'll be eating nothing but moss food for the rest of your perverted life. The toad huffed before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Jiraiya climbed to his feet before huffing loudly. He isn't even my damn apprentice. A wave of clear liquid shot out of the mouth of a humongous toad. The toad was covered in armor reminiscent of a samurai. A tanto sat unused along his waist as he propelled the liquid from his gullet. A small spark quickly flew from under him and hit the clear liquid while it was in midair. The clear liquid exploded into a brilliant array of blue and red flames. The flames quickly began to rain down on the area below it. Several figures, almost completely invisible due to the darkness of the night, quickly darted their way along the ground. They weaved in and out of the falling flames, only 1 or 2 of the more inexperienced ones getting hit by the flaming rain. The figures must have been using some type of technique to stay hidden because even when the flames drew near them, their true forms were not revealed to the attacking toads. Water users step forward. An amplified voice rang from the side of the toads. Pairs of gigantic toads quickly jumped forward as their cheeks swelled up to monstrous levels. After several moments of waiting, each released a powerful torrent of water that literally carved the land where it touched it. Drop back. Raiten, Denposika. A human voice yelled. The silhouettes stopped their advancement before quickly running in the opposite direction of the approaching wave. The sky was suddenly filled with a loud crack as an arc of lightning shot from the fingertips into the ground from a white-cloaked figure. The lightning bent and arched between the retreating panthers, not harming a single one of them. The lightning hit the toads, instantly electrifying them. The toads who were still spewing the massive amounts of water were fried from the inside out as the water they were spitting out filled with millions of volts. The smell of burnt frogs filled the air as several toads fell to the ground, charred and dead. Naruto. Chains. A loud voice rumbled from the side opposite of the toad. Silence filled the battlefield briefly before the earth began to shake violently. Cracks began to appear in the earth as a golden light shone through those lights. The toads were taken by surprise when a literal wave of golden chains sprung up hundreds of feet before them, blocking their view of the enemy. The sound of metal sliding against metal rung throughout their side of the battlefield as several toads unsheathed their swords as the wave of golden chains sped towards them. A line of sword-wielding toads stood in the way of the wave of chakra constructs. A loud-sounding rush of air was heard as all the toads collectively swung their blades at the chakra constructs. Links of chains were separated from each other as the blades cut through them like butter. The toads used their arms and shield to cover themselves from the falling, dismantled links of chain. I can't even see their silhouettes anymore. Where did they go? A toad asked. Chatter began to spread through the ranks of toad as they attempted to peer into the darkness to catch a glimpse of their enemies. Maybe they used the chains to cover their retreat? One of the toads offered up as an idea. Hundreds of yards away from the front line, a truck-sized toad was sitting cross-legged on top of a boulder. His palms were pressed together and his eyes were closed as he sat perfectly clear. An aura of calmness surrounded the toad as not even the wind seemed to bother him. Suddenly the toad's eyes flashed open, revealing his almost glowing orange irises. The toad sucked in a breath before yelling loudly. The enemy is to the left. The toad's warning was too late as the first panther struck. The building-sized panther's claws sunk cleanly into the fat neck of a warrior toad. The panther quickly retracted its arm and watched in satisfaction as the red liquid spurted from the wounds of the toad's neck. The toad fell dead within seconds. Next to him a similar scene was happening as the warriors of the panther clan managed to catch the left flank of toad army by surprise. The toad's strength and numbers meant nothing as the panthers cut through their surprised enemies. By the time the toads had managed to reorganize themselves, several dozen of their comrades had fallen to the claws of the panthers. Left flank leap into the air, right flank soak them with oil. The ground shook monstrously as hundreds of gigantic toads jumped into the air all at once. Just as the last toad reached the height of several stories in the air, the toads behind them unleashed their oil bombs. The panthers that had originally engaged the left flank of the small toad army was hit directly by the orbs of oil. The small group of panthers attempted to make a quick retreat, but they were not quick enough to avoid the small fire jutsu that came shooting out of the mouth of one of the smaller toads. Bestial roars filled the air as the panther's fur was set ablaze. The toads watched with a grimace as their opponent literally melted before their eyes. The smell of burned fur and flesh filled the toads' noses. "Raten, Kurauro Kankyo Setai." Even though the voice yelled out its technique, the owner could not be overheard by the blazing infernos that covered the already dead panther's body. The toad's eyes were drawn to the front once again as a single lightning strike went up from the ground and into the sky. The clouds seemed to light up as the lightning strike broke up into hundreds of similar bolts. "Raise your shields and watch from above." The same toad who had screamed out the first warning yelled again. The army followed his orders and raised up their giant wooden shields above their head. If they had just been a second late, they would have been struck by hundreds of lightning bolts that rained from the sky. The lightning smashed against the thick wooden seals, splintering it greatly, but the shield stood its ground to the chakra-infused lightning. "Don't put down your SH." The toad's warning was drowned out when a massive lightning bolt soared from the clouds towards the ground. The shields were mere toothpicks to the condensed lightning chakra. Several of the toads closest to the strike were sent flying through the air like rag dolls. The earth was left scarred and charred from the attack. "Throw down your weapons and surrender, Toad Clan. You'll be taken peacefully and the wounded will be treated." A loud voice ranged out from the panther side. The demand was immediately met with a chorus of "No." From the side of the toads. "The Toad Clan shall never surrender to you felines. We will stand and fight." Cheers followed the bold proclamation. The air seemed to shake with the confidence and exuberance that the toads emitted. This was one of the first battles in the Panther/Toad War. The two warring clans had officially declared war on one another after a failed peace meeting. Flashback: it was a very tense morning in the capital city of the Gecko clan. Actually, tense wasn't even the proper word for the atmosphere that surrounded the quaint capital city. The residents seemed to be walking on eggshells as they made their way through the streets of Rankaku. They tried to stick to their irregular schedule, but even the peaceful and laid-back members of the Gecko clan couldn't focus. It had been 5 days since the Panthers had popped up from out of extinction and began to take toad strongholds and villages. Their sudden comeback to the summoning world had been a major shock to all of the remaining summoning clans. The Panther clan had been one of the superpowers of the summoning world back in the olden days, right alongside the Dragon clan, Toad clan, Lion clan and even the Phoenix clan. It had been a major shock to hear that the whole entire clan had been slaughtered seemingly overnight. It was because of this sudden revival and takeover of toad settlements that the two clans had called this meeting to settle their differences peaceful. While the mortality rate during the few panther assaults that had already taken place were particularly low, it seemed that both clans still wanted to avoid all unnecessary death. The leaders of the Gecko clan were always a neutral clan, so they found it fit to host what was supposed to be a peaceful meeting between the two warring clans. "Withdraw your troops from our land and there will be no problems." The booming voice of the boss for the Toad summoning clan roared out while slamming his sword against the ground. It was best to say that the peaceful route was slowly going down the drain. "This is not your land, Bunta. I prowled along this land as a young cub. I was raised on this land. It is the rightful property of the Panther clan. So you drop your weapons and withdraw your troops." "You, the leader of the Panthers," said in a calm voice. The two parties of summoning clans were separated by a massive wooden table that seemed to span hundreds of feet. The room was very simplistic, almost Spartan considering the lack of decoration. The summoning bosses were seated under lavish pillows, while their guards stood patiently behind them. "You have no right to just pop out of the hole you've been hiding under for the past couple of centuries and attack our villages. This is a sign of war and the Toad clan will respond with hostile actions if you continue this," Game Ubuntu yelled back. The two sides erupted into loud yelling as they both defended their clan leader's claim from the other. You narrowed his eyes at the Toad summon while the Toad took a puff from his pipe. Silence. Both sides were silenced by a croaky voice and the sound of a small wooden cane slamming against the table. The sea of Toad warriors slowly parted as whispers erupted among them. With a loud grunt, a small toad jumped its way onto the table. The Toad's brown cloak wrapped comfortable against its dark green skin. His yellow, bar-like pupils were surrounded by wrinkles which displayed his old age. "These was supposed to be a peaceful meeting and we are only 5 minutes in. You're already spouting violence. I will not allow this," the small toad said. Game Ubuntu growled before taking another puffin with his pipe. Yu's tail waved behind him lazily as he continued to remain quiet, seemingly satisfied with letting the Toad Sage talk. Now Yu-san, we of the Toad clan would rather not go through war. The only way we fight is to protect our summoners. What can we do to stop this senseless violence? Fukasaku asked with a gentle tone. Yu leaned his head down to stare at the mini-sized Toad before slowly getting up from his relaxed position. He stood to his full height, making him tower over all of his supporters and even a vast majority of the Toad clan. The only who bested him in height was Gamabunta, but that was only by a couple of yards. The only way for you to end this is the immediate removal of all members of the Toad clan from our land. This land stretched between Shiro's plains and all the way up to the jungles that hide the entrance to Mount Myaboku. If agreed to, the Toads will be given a week to relay the message to their clan members and for each member to remove themselves from our land. Those who do not comply will be assumed as traitors and dealt with using the necessary force, Yu said in a monotone voice. His demands was once again met with outrage from every member on the Toad size. Yu and his clan members remained silent as the Toads continued their yelling. You must realize that there is no way we can comply to those demands. There are tens of thousands of Toads that live on that land. To make them all forcibly leave their homes in under a week would be impossible. Plus Mount Myaboku cannot sustain those numbers. Fukasaku tried to explain. The old sage Toad could actually say that he was offended when Yu's laughter reached his ears. Then prepare for continued hostility. Dozens of generations of my ancestors are buried in those land. I will not have you Toads tarnish it any longer, Yu said before slowly turning his massive form away from the Toads. You will regret this decision, Yu. No one harms the Toad clan without retribution, Gamabunta yelled. His shout was ignored as each and every panther slowly faded before their eyes as if they were mere illusions. I should have never allowed your father to take their land in the first. Now we deal with the repercussions, Fukasaku sighed before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. Gamabunta merely grunted before erupting into a massive cloud of smoke. He had planning to do. Flashback ends after that day, the Toads had issued a proclamation of war against the Panther clan. A warning was sent to each village occupied by members of the Toad clan, warning them against possible attacks from the so-called feline filth as Gamabunta liked to describe the Panther clan. This was one of these attacks. The large village had managed to gather up a couple hundred of Toads that were somewhat proficient at the use of a sword and the required dojutsus. The rushed militia had managed to get a total of 6 hours of training before the Panthers struck. Half of their troops had been completely wiped out by the Panthers' initial attack. The felines struck in the very beginning of the night with their amazing talent in stealth. The other half had managed to realize they were under attack, recuperate from such a heavy loss in their numbers and send a counter-attack. While the Panthers held an advantage in speed and stealth, the Toads obviously held the advantage in strength and stamina. Aware that they were under attack, the large group of Toads had managed to push the small group of Panthers across the field they used for growing crops. Though they too were forced to retreat when they realized a larger group of Panthers were waiting for them at the other end of the field. They had just managed to escape with their lives as the Panthers unleashed an array of claw attacks and jutsus. The two sides had remained at a stalemate for several hours, yelling demands, jeers and orders to each other from each side of the field. No deaths had taken place since the deaths of the first side of the Toad militia. Then 2 a.m. struck. The Toads were caught by surprise when all of the Panthers seemed to vanish before their very eyes. Seconds later, the Panthers had started their assault on the left flank. Now the Toads were cheering loudly as they riled behind the cry of never giving up. They raised their shields up to their bright-colored chests before slamming their fists against the round, wooden shields. The sound of thumping filled the air as the Toads began to stomp their feet while slamming their fists against their shields. On the Panther sides, the feline summons were watching their enemies attempt to intimidate them using their confidence and loud noises. Best to say it was not having an effect of the battle-hungry Panther clan. They had been waiting for decades, even centuries for some, to win back their land, and a little shield banging was not going to stop them. They're down to a fifth of their original numbers but still refuse to surrender. I would commend them for their bravery if I didn't know they will have to die for it. The white-cloaked figure said. He felt the panther he was riding under snort before releasing a small chuckle. Don't commend senseless bravery, Naruto-sama, commend common sense and logic. They are risking the lives of their children and wives because of their so-called bravery and pride. Though if they really do believe us to be bloodthirsty savages, in their minds they would be better off to die fighting. Naruto released a small chuckle before standing on the back of the panther. His eyes scanned over his brothers and saw the anticipation balled up in their bodies. Their muscles could be seen tensing and untensing beneath their thick coats of fur. A mixture of battle lust and excitement filled the air as the panthers awaited their orders. Let's say we finish this, Shinji-sama? I'll distract them from lightning from above while we split the main forces into 3 groups. The first group will launch a direct attack to their front while the 2 other groups hide their presence using hiding with Meisaigaku no Jutsu to flank them. Between shielding themselves from my lightning attacks and fending off the main attacking force, they will succumb to our 2 flanking forces. Shinji hummed for several seconds before nodding his head. Naruto allowed a large smirk to grace his face before once again taking a seat on the panther's back. Shinji was one of the many panthers he had become acquainted with since he first signed the panther contract. The building-sized panther was one of the few remaining panthers that had survived the slaughter. The panther had been a young cub when his grandmother had picked him up by the scruff of his neck and thrown him across the field. Shinji had told him that from midair he had watched his father attempt to fight off the invasion only to be soaked in the thick oil of the Toad clan and lit aflame. Even from his position, several hundred feet in the air, he could hear his father's scream. He had landed over several thousand yards away, dazed from the landing but alive. He could see the blaze that once was his village as the Toads jumped through it. He continued to stare as the Toads destroyed his birth town as tears streamed down his face. The sound of screams reached his ears as the Toads slaughtered any type of resistance that faced them. He was eventually dragged away by other surviving members of the villages. The small group had hidden out deep in one of the jungles that littered the summoning realm. They survived on plants and fruit for several years before meeting you. The White Panther had immediately taken them in with the group he was already traveling with. Even back then, he had asserted himself as the leader as he led the group of panthers through the jungles of the summoning realm. Eventually the group had managed to find more of their brethren before finding a series of underground caves to live in. In there they prospered. The panthers had managed to slowly grow their numbers as men and women finally had the chance to mate without the fear of being on the run. Over several centuries, their numbers had grown to the point where even the several hundred-mile stretch of underground caves could not contain their numbers. It was then where Yu had finally decided it was time to win back their land. He was met with absolutely no opposition as each member of their group, young or old, had grown tired of living in their caves. The young had heard stories of the rolling plains and massive mountains and wanted to experience them themselves, while the old held a sense of bitterness and retribution at being effectively kicked off their ancestral land. In the end, it was not all that hard to find several thousand volunteers who were willing to join their army. Then Naruto came along and the panther could finally implement their plans. While the panthers believed they could survive and even win a war against the Toads without their summon, they would suffer large casualties and would put themselves back in the position they had found themselves a couple of centuries ago. With a summoner, especially with someone as strong as Naruto, the panthers would not only win this war but they would strive and come out on top. The boys' techniques were the perfect counter to the Toads. Split yourself into 3 groups. The strongest into 1. You will assault them up front. The other 2 groups will flank to their left and right respectively. Naruto will be launching a long-range assault from above on them, giving us the distraction to finish this battle, Shinji yelled out. His orders were met with a silent chorus of acceptance from his troops before they quickly split into their 3 groups. Naruto watched as 2 of the 3 groups disappeared before his eyes. Though if he focused enough, he could see the slight distortion of light, but that was only barely in the dark inkiness of the night. Naruto ripped his eyes away from the hidden panthers to stare at the line of Toads. His eyes crinkled slightly as a large grin crossed his face. He completely closed his eyes before inhaling a deep breath, allowing the smell of burning flesh and rotting corpses to fill his nose. To his slight surprise and satisfaction, he found that the smell didn't distract him at all from his task at hand. If anything, it gave his mind something to focus on. Almost mechanically the demon container began to go through a small chain of hand signs. Even though the hand signs to this jutsu were relatively simple, he needed complete concentration due to his inexperience with it. Plus there was the small chance he could mess up the chakra manipulation and blow out his chakra coils. Though he liked not to think about that. Naruto finished with the dragon hand sign as he released a breath. Small amounts of static started to form around him as he held the hand sign for several seconds. The static became more and more prominent as he held the hand sign longer. Raiten, Kami no Namida. Naruto whispered out before releasing the full brunt of his chakra. The Toads stopped their shield banging to stare as a giant beam of light cut through the clouds at high speed. They had to cover their eyes as a strong wind filled with dust and debris came shooting their way. The main group of panthers released a loud roar, bringing the Toads' attention back to them, before bounding their way across the field towards the Toads. The amphibians stopped their staring and the front line lowered themselves in a defensive position while the Toads behind them prepared to unleash their jutsus. Watch from above. The Toad with the obvious sensing abilities yelled at. Some of the toads in the front line fell back behind the remaining front line fighters and raised their shields to cover themselves and another toad. Their other hand went to their hips where they pulled out a sword and other assortments of weapons dependent on each toad. Just as the toads raised their shield, a blue beam of light shot from the clouds at high speed and slammed into the shields. The spot where the beam touched were badly burned and in some cases instantly evaporated from the high amounts of concentrated chakra. The toads' shields were rendered almost useless within the first seconds of the techniques. A rain of high-power concentrated beams of chakra fell upon the toad army. The toads were forced to block the beams with their arms, suffering massive burns and even losing a limb in some cases. Just as the technique reached its peak, the main attacking force of the Panthers arrived at the front line. Loud roars filled the air as the Panthers dove headfirst into battle. The agile felines dived and weaved in between swords, spears and shields to sink their claws and teeth into the tired and weary toads. Limbs and chunks of flesh littered the ground as the Panthers literally took bites out of their targets. The toads tried their best to defend against their more agile opponents. But every time they attempted to swing their swords, a beam of chakra would rip from the sky towards them. Each time they tried to defend themselves from the sky attacks, a panther would rip into their skin. The front line of the Toad clan quickly buckled and collapsed under the combined forces of Naruto's attack and the main fighting group of the Panthers. Reserves from the right and left flank crushed to support their comrades. Then the Panthers' secondary forces struck. The Toads making up the left and right flank were taken by surprise when air around them seemed to warp and distort. They attempted to raise their shields in defense but they weren't quick enough. The Panthers struck with unmatched ferocity during their sneak attack. Outnumbered by their attempt to help the front line and tired from defending against Naruto's attack, the Toads stood no chance. Within minutes, the small Toad army was reduced to a single handful of injured warriors. "Seems this battle is ours, eh Naruto?" Shinji waited for a response for several seconds before turning his head. He saw that his human brother-in-arms was now passed out on his back. His last technique must have tired him out. "He deserves the rest," Shinji said before calling over one of the Panthers that had remained by his side. He wrapped his tail around his summoner before gently lowering him onto the back of the Panther. "Take him back to headquarters and tell Usama that we succeeded in overthrowing the stronghold at the entrance of Shiro's plain." The Panther nodded before wrapping its own tail around Naruto before bounding in the opposite direction. Shinji watched the Panther dart its way into the mountainous region that lay behind them. The Panther then turned his head where he saw his comrades surrounding the remaining Toads who would surrender. "Our homelands is just within our grasp," Shinji said to himself before slowly walking his way towards the Toad village. He could see women and children slowly peeking their heads out of their houses only to gain a look of horror at seeing their husbands, brothers, uncles and even sisters in some cases lying dead on their planting fields. Shinji would never say it out loud but he reveled in those looks. Every scream from a Toad, every whiff of burned flesh, every splash of blood thrown into the air as his enemies crumbled before him and his army. He absolutely loved it. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.